Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this third thematic roundtable and co-chair the discussions along with my civil society colleague, Mr. Juan Angel De Gouvei of RIADIS. Together, we will facilitate this roundtable discussion on the important issue of promoting inclusive environments for the full implementation of the CRPD. This meeting is held using remote simultaneous interpretation. I kindly ask participants to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working remotely and of the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. In light of this, the meeting will end promptly as its scheduled end time at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we will now see opening remarks of this roundtable discussion from the Foreign Minister of Finland, Mr. Pekka Haavisto.
Your Excellencies, dear participants, it's an honor for me to address this roundtable, which discusses the important topic of promoting inclusive environments for the full implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Inclusive and competent Finland, a socially, economically and ecologically sustainable society. I'm happy to present you the title of the program of the current government, the government of Prime Minister. One of its strategic themes is fair, equal and inclusive Finland. In order for a nation to be prosperous, it has to invest in the well-being and inclusion of all people. No one shall be left behind. Everyone is important, everyone matters. Finland is committed to the promotion and protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, also in the context of its candidacy to the UN Human Rights Council for the term 2022-2024. In Finland, we aim at promoting and maintaining the health, well-being, functional capacity, workability and social protection of the whole population and to reduce inequalities in health and well-being. While we have achieved these objectives for many, we still have a work to do to make sure people get all the services they need and the services meet their needs. The Finnish model for addressing inequality and disability rights can be summarized in 4 key elements. Firstly, human rights are the core for all activities. Secondly, it is important to support equal, accessible and non-discriminatory national institutions, strategies and policies, and to ensure capacity of duty bearers at all levels to deliver services and protection for all. This is an investment that delivers sustainable results. Third point is gender equality, which cuts across all interventions and is a key priority for Finland. The fourth and very significant point is civil society participation. In this case, meaningful participation of the organizations of persons with disabilities in particular. It's a principle without which no sustainable results in terms of human rights for persons with disabilities can be achieved. Cornerstones in achieving inclusion and non-discrimination and equality. There is no equality without accessibility. Accessibility is one of the general principles of the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD. Accessibility is a human right and a precondition for the realization of other human rights and fundamental freedoms. Accessibility and non-discrimination are also closely tied together because the implementation of the prohibition of discrimination presupposes, in principle, the accessibility of the environment. One of the main barriers to the creation of inclusive environment is the lack of accessibility of physical environments. In Finland, we have implemented the minimum standards and guidelines for the accessibility of facilities. However, our non-discrimination ombudsman has pointed out that the accessibility of the existing built environment is still a significant problem. Therefore, we are nationally targeting to achieving 1 million accessible dwellings by 2030. Currently, we are around mid-target. More accessible housing is needed, not only through new construction, but also through renovation. In all development plans, the CRPD must be taken into account. Also, Agenda 2030 considers inclusive environments as crucial means for progressing towards the Sustainable Development Goals. To ensure that no one is left behind in development, persons with disabilities and their representative organizations need to be involved when planning the environments we all live in. The application of universal design must be taken into consideration in the design and construction of public spaces, public transport, housing, and other aspects of urban and rural planning. Accessibility as a policy must be closely linked to other policy areas, and its effects needs to be better identified and assessed in decision making. It's also important recognize that decisions in other policy areas have an effect on accessibility as well. Therefore, we always need to have a holistic approach and keep the principles of equality and non-discrimination clearly in our minds. Dear participants, as the last point in my introductory remarks, I would like to raise the issue of modern technologies and their accessibility to all persons. We live in the era of fast-paced technological development. New technologies have increased our well-being in many ways, and most likely they continue to affect positively in our lives. Computer-assisted or artificial intelligence-enabled decision-making can also significantly reduce the costs and the time needed, and thereby enable faster service for individuals. However, there is also another side of the coin. Artificial intelligence tends to amplify bias and replicate entrenched discrimination patterns and lead into a discriminatory result. Modern technologies and the equipment for their use can also pose additional barriers for people with disabilities. Therefore, it's equally important to bear in mind not only the accessibility of the physical environment, but also the accessibility of the technological environment. Artificial intelligence technologies have potential to drive our common development agenda and forward the rights and agency of persons with disabilities. Inclusiveness of innovation processes and diversity in the artificial intelligence workforce and in design processes are the keys to ensure that realities of persons with disabilities are reflected in the development of modern technologies. I thank you for your attention and wish you fruitful discussions and a successful roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you. After these opening remarks by the Finnish Foreign Minister, Mr. Pekka Haavisto, I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished panelists we have today. We have Ms. Rocío de Moreno, First Lady of Ecuador and President of the Technical Secretariat of the Toda Vida plan. Mr. Paweł Wdówik, Government Commissioner of Persons with Disabilities at the Ministry of Family and Social Planning of Poland. Mr. Santiago Velasquez, founder of EyeSyght and Hailo Australia. And Ms. Frances West, former Chief Accessibility Officer at IBM and founder of Frances West Company USA. Ms. Bhargavi Davar, Director Transforming Communities for Inclusion, Asia Pacific. Mr. Mark Mapemba, Vice President of Inclusion International Malawi. To have a focused and interactive discussion, I would kindly invite each of our panelists to make an initial presentation for 7 minutes. After presentations, we will invite delegations and other observers to join a follow-up interactive discussion with panel members who will respond to questions and comments from the floor In that segment of about 1 hour, there will be opportunities for delegations and other observers to either pose their specific questions to panelists or to make brief comments that are relevant to the current discussion in the roundtable. Delegations can make such requests through a Google Live form, which would be shared just before the start of the interactive dialogue. Please only inscribe after the chair opens the floor for questions or comments. If you are given the floor, please unmute yourself and indicate your name, followed by your delegation or organization before posing your question. Accredited NGOs and other observers have prior to this conference already submitted their request in writing via email to the Secretariat. Please only take the floor when invited to speak. Please note, all interventions shall be strictly limited to no longer than 3 minutes, with no exception, and I apologize in advance if I have to remind you of the time limit. Now let me turn to our distinguished panelists. Please note that when making your oral presentations and engaging in the interactive discussion, you are invited to address one or more of the following questions as outlined in the background paper for the roundtable, namely, what are good examples of existing initiatives to remove barriers and make environments inclusive for persons with disabilities? How can these good practices be scaled up? And then what can be done by governments, United Nations system agencies, donors, civil society, and private actors to make all environments inclusive for persons with disabilities, and how can they work together to that end? Then what measures do state parties need to take to increase the availability and use of assistive technology for and by those who need it? What initiatives have been taken to address the unmet need for assistive technology? Then, are there specific measures that have encouraged both in the public and private sectors the creation of products and services designed with the needs of persons with disabilities in mind, including universal design? Then, what policy and practical measures are necessary to invest in building capacity among governments, civil society, and the private sector for the creation of inclusive environments that empower of persons with disabilities? And then how can governments and other stakeholders raise awareness and remove barriers and make environments, including educational, work and health environments, inclusive for women and girls with disabilities? And then what examples exist of steps taken to address the violation of the rights of persons with disabilities in various contexts, including in detention, under forced treatment, or under guardianship? And finally, what innovations emerging from the response to and recovery from COVID-19 pandemic should be pursued to advance the social inclusion of persons with disabilities as both beneficiaries and agents of change? Now it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Rocío de Moreno, First Lady of Ecuador and President of the Technical Secretariat of the Toda Una Vida plan. The Toda Una Vida plan coordinates the social protection programs of Ecuador, including for persons with disabilities. The plan seeks to transform living conditions through sustained work in risk reduction, capacity strengthening, and the creation of opportunities through integral interventions for key marginalized populations. Ms. Moreno's work is grounded in her dedication to forming inclusive and enabling environments for the protection and promotion of human rights and sustainable development for all and leaving no one behind. Ms. Moreno's presentation is through video. Please.
I bring you warm greetings from the President of the Republic of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno Garces. Since 2018, Ecuador has had the honor of presiding over this important conference, a space for us, the representatives of different countries, to reflect on the challenges that persons with disabilities around the world have to contend with. However, it should also be a place for proposals with pragmatic solutions geared toward making this a better world, a more just, inclusive, and equitable world. This is the last year that Ecuador will serve at the highest level on the Bureau. It is also the beginning of a decade with one major goal: to take action to deliver the 2030 Agenda, which is our guide to implementing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Furthermore, this is a pivotal year in the history of humanity. The pandemic has sorely tested us all as individuals and as a community. It has served as an opportunity to rethink and to question the efficiency and effectiveness of public policies, especially of policies designed to include those groups requiring more attention from their central governments. There is no denying that as a result of the pandemic, persons with disabilities have had to face greater difficulties gaining access to their rights. For this reason, it is vital that we urge all governments of the world to place special emphasis on the strategies we devise to mitigate these effects. And more importantly, not to delay addressing them and making them a priority. Nevertheless, if we cast our minds back 10 years, we would see clearly today that our countries have gone through significant changes in all spheres of life, especially in the social arena, where persons with disabilities have managed to exercise more agency, and we must not stop there. In Ecuador, a special effort has been made to lay a solid foundation to ensure access to those rights through a legal framework and public policies that are aligned with the principles of the Convention, so as to ensure respect for the dignity of persons with disabilities and empathy toward them. From the start of the flagship Manuela Espejo mission in 2009 to initiatives underway today, including the Toda Una Vida plan, whole life plan, and the last Manuela's missions, our experiences have given shape to public policies that are human rights centered and which have also been recognized as benchmarks for countries of the region and the world. However, at the same time, our efforts have been focused on promoting good practices, such as running working committees to follow up on the recommendations of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In fact, just a few days ago, we issued our accessible tourism policy, which is a boost to our tourism sector in conjunction with the IADB, and the aim is to strengthen our political policies to improve the lives of persons with disability and their families. Turning now to today's roundtable theme, and as part of giving priority to global actions to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, it's relevant that we reflect on the need to guarantee access to all public spaces as part of the way we plan our cities. The lack of inclusive urban mobility prevents many persons with disabilities from accessing education, work, health services, and from participating in their communities, and it considerably affects their autonomy. Now, it is true that cities are increasingly more accessible. However, there are still no playgrounds where all children can play equally. Inclusive parks continue to be a pending issue. And for this reason, the government of the Republic of Ecuador has been working to retrofit and install 45 inclusive parks at the national level with manuals for their proper use, maintenance, and management, and these are available in accessible formats. We need our cities to focus more on persons with disabilities, but at the same time, they must also focus on children and older persons. We must build shared recreation spaces without preference or distinction, where everyone can share a safe space and can enjoy all their rights. Over the years, through the Housing for All mission, Casa para Todos, our efforts have been focused on building inclusive communities, which take into account the opinion of persons with disabilities, not only through including them in accommodations in their homes, communities, recreation, and sporting facilities, but also by including them in decision-making spaces where they have a voice and vote in assemblies in their communities, thus effectively ensuring social inclusion and economic integration for persons with disabilities. I should also mention that Ecuador has been working on the methodological guide for inclusive risk management, which is part of a toolkit we are putting together to protect the lives of persons with disabilities and their relatives from the negative effects, and also to promote construction and their participation in social integration at all phases of risk management, which is very important in this emergency that we're currently experiencing. I'm pleased to highlight that my country has strengthened its tourism policy. We have undertaken initiatives that have led to positive developments and advances that were applauded in 2019 by the United Nations Committee for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. A few days ago, we issued our accessible tourism policy, which is promoting the tourism sector in our country and at the same time promoting spaces where persons with disability can actually be active tourists. Let me reiterate, when spaces are accessible, we all win. I must stress that countries still have a long way to go to make it possible for persons with disabilities to access quality services and play an active role in our societies, and thereby achieve the targets set for the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. In closing, I would like to reemphasize that our societies, beyond focusing on inclusion, must gear our efforts toward a world where all human beings can truly live together, where we are all respected as individuals for who we are, where disabilities are nothing more than just another of the particularities of human diversity, a world where no one will have to doubt their worth or whether they belong, a world where no one is left behind.
I thank Ms. Moreno for her excellent presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Paweł Wdówik, Government Commissioner of Persons with Disabilities at the Ministry of Family and Social Policy of Poland. Mr. Wdówik is the Governmental Commissioner for People with Disabilities and Secretary of State in the Ministry of Family and Social Policy of the Republic of Poland since January 2020. Since 1997, he has been the head of the Office for Disabled People at the University of Warsaw. Since 2010, he has been a member of the Polish Ombudsman's Committee of Experts on People with Disabilities. Mr. Wdówik is also the creator of a support system at the University of Warsaw, which has worked to ensure accessibility, assistance, and psychological support for persons with disabilities. Mr. Wdówik, you have the floor, please.
Much. Thank you very much for this great opportunity, and I would like to start from thanking you for this opportunity to speak in the debate on inclusive environments for persons with disabilities. The value of this debate is all the greater because today we are celebrating International Day of Persons with Disabilities. In the preamble to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we read that accessibility to the physical, social, economic, and cultural environment, access to health and education, and to information and communication are essential for full enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by persons with disabilities. Moreover, it should be underlined then that environmental accessibility is necessary for realization of the rights of people with disabilities, especially the right to dignified and independent living. The development of inclusive environment will not be possible without removing barriers, especially in the access to information, education, and environment. The disability policy in Poland is fully in line with the topics of inclusive environment. In recent years, we have developed in Poland new solutions for social inclusion and supporting independent living of persons with disabilities. Legislative and programming measures have been taken and implemented in the area of social policy, including family policy, social security, healthcare, education, employment, and public spaces, such as surrounding, transport, and also information and communication. We are working on further comprehensive solutions aimed at implementing the rights of people with disabilities and their full integration into the society by undertaking the in-depth dialogue with communities of persons with disabilities. The participation of NGOs and other organizations is crucial for developing solutions. The point of view of persons with disabilities and their particular needs related to provision of particular support, such as housing, health care, and other aspects, are given priority. For better development of the accessibility and the elimination of barriers, the expenditure of support for persons with disabilities has been increased from around $4 billion in 2015 to around $7 billion this year, 2020, I mean. Recently created Solidarity Fund is aimed to increase the independence of persons with the highest need of support, but also to promote the new solutions brought to our societies, including new assistive technologies. Solidarity Fund helps to implement programs relating to residential care and personal assistance. I would like to say that bringing to life the aspect of human rights for persons with disabilities is not possible without including them to finding the solutions and giving them the place of being citizens, not persons needing care, but citizens having the right to independently decide about their lives, about their decisions, their work, education, and all aspects of their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wdówik, and thank you for being so good also on timekeeping. And many thanks for your contribution. Now it is my honor to present our next panelist, Mr. Santiago Velasquez, founder of EyeSyght and Hailo Australia. Mr. Velasquez, inspired by his vision impairment, has applied his expertise in electrical engineering expertise to invent solutions to make this world more inclusive. He was the first blind electrical engineering student in the Southern Hemisphere. Now at 23 years old, he is a founder of two companies, EyeSyght and Hailo, which have done extraordinary work toward solving accessibility issues in business, education, employment, and navigation. Mr. Velasquez, you have the floor, please.
Morning, distinguished guests, delegates of states parties, and civil society representatives. It is an honor to speak to you and represent Australia at the United Nations today. What would you think if I were to ask you to describe an item I was holding in my hand with your eyes closed? What would you think if I were to ask you to listen to my presentation on mute? How about hailing a bus that you could not see approaching? I could continue with hypotheticals, but they are only hypotheticals if you are able and considered that by the world. Let's take one of the affirmation scenarios further. If we were to place you in a metropolis and were to ask you to hail a bus without seeing it, some of you might take the challenge, but the majority will not. Those who do take that challenge will feel frustrated at some point throughout the experience. And this is why inclusive spaces are so important. Because the rules of society, anybody who's able, who takes that challenge, will be considered disabled, even if it's just for a short period of time. Inclusion is a collective effort, and there are three things that I think we ought to remember to make it a fact of life. Inclusiveness does not exist. Don't be inclusive just because it is the right thing to do. And inclusion is only hard if you make it hard. Those three affirmation points go against everything that we are trying to do regarding inclusion around the world. But sometimes we have to break things before we can fix them. And believe me, this is one of those times. Inclusivity does not exist. It is just a dream and nothing else. Inclusion is only as powerful as the condition in question. As easy as that condition is to understand by the general population, as admirable as the thought leaders of that condition are, and as powerful as the organizations who represent those conditions are. If you're vision impaired like myself, you know that audio, large print, braille, and bright colors are not the only ways of making spaces accessible. However, that is the approach that everybody who designs on our behalf takes. And this occurs for every disability under the sun, and even those that are yet to be classified. I don't want anybody to misconstrue what I'm saying to mean that inclusiveness is impossible. In the contrary, it's easy, but we just need to be in the same page. The second point, don't be inclusive just because it is the right thing to do, is critical. That state of feel good does not last forever. We all know what the right thing to do is, and yet we don't always do it. Don't litter, be kind to others, don't talk behind others' backs, etc. Subconsciously or consciously, we all break those rules. So we should not kid ourselves into believing that we can take that same approach with inclusion. There are many reasons why we need to have inclusivity and inclusive spaces, but here are just two. One, it helps everybody around the world. And two, it makes financial sense for both countries and individuals all around the world. The third point, inclusion is only hard if we make it hard. Anything can be hard, but it can also become easy. Our battleground, the world, is the biggest inaccessible space there is. I'm only disabled because the sighted world says so. Nothing else. But I'm not the only one. We are disabled in the eyes, the ears, the minds of our able-bodied peers. Not for anything else. We need to understand that we need to fail. And we need to learn from those mistakes, just as the sighted world, the non-impaired world, is able to do so. Here in Australia, I've been fortunate to utilize my electrical engineering degree to find and start 2 companies that are tackling accessibility issues. One of them being hailing buses, which I posed as an example earlier on. If you cannot see a bus approaching, how are you supposed to hail it? A lot of the times you get left behind, and we're fortunate that because of the support we have received, we're doing a trial in Sydney. But the idea behind this solution and others is not only to improve the accessibility for people who have a vision impairment, but also for others. Just because somebody with a disability wants to do something that has never been done by somebody with that condition, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't let them. I have driven a car. I have scuba dived. I have gone rock climbing. I have even piloted a plane, believe it or not. And from all those experiences, I have grown as a person, and I have grown to realize that we're not defined by our disability. We rely on the kindness of strangers to make our world accessible. That's only the first step, and there is so much more. So don't idealize thought leaders of our specific condition, because there are billions of people around the world that just want to live their regular lives. If you don't know, just ask. That's all you need to do. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Velasquez, for your inspiring presentation. And now I will hand over to my co-chair, Mr. Juan Angel De Gouvei of RIADIS. So, Juan Angel, you have the chair.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Ambassador Jukka Salovaara, Permanent Representative of Finland to the United Nations, distinguished panelists and participants, it is my privilege and honor to co-chair this roundtable today. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude for the support we have received for this roundtable from a wide range of stakeholders, in particular from the conference secretariat. The issues we are about to discuss are fundamental to the advancement of the rights of persons with disability in the global agenda. And our next speaker, Ms. Frances West, is former Chief Accessibility Officer of IBM and founder of Frances West Company, USA. Ms. West is a recognized thought leader, speaker, strategist, an executive known for her work in innovation, technology, and business transformation. She is former and first Chief Accessibility Officer at IBM and author of Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation, a blueprint to scale and sustain inclusion, and the founder of Frances West Company, a global strategy advisory company focused on operationalizing inclusion as a business and technology imperative. So I'm now happy at this time to give the floor to Mrs. West.
Thank you very much. It is absolutely my honor and privilege to speak to the audience today about this very important topic. What I'm hoping to share in the next few minutes is really from a both business and also from the technology perspective, and why it is so important that we promote inclusive environment for the full implementation of CRPD. In the past 9 months since March, the COVID-19, I think everybody has begun to realize how important it is for technology to connect all of us. And technology today underpins everything we do, how we learn, how we work, how we socialize, how we play. So without technology, we really, as a society, would not be able to function. And because of that, as we think about implementation of inclusive environment, the virtual environment or the digital environment is just as important. And I would say that UN CRPDs actually has set the new high ground and also set the stage for private sectors to really pay attention, because for the first time, we were able to rally around a policy or global policy that really allowed us to set our sight high and use the technology not just for personal kind of gain, but for the society at large, to increase the society, not just productivity, but the harmony. But as we think about technology implementation for inclusive society, what are some of the angles that we have to think about? And I think it actually covers both the spectrums. On the individual level, we are now as individual really should and could really rely on technology to enable us to improve our quality of life or independent living scenario. Everybody, and most people around the world now have some kind of a cell phone. Even if it's not a smartphone, just the connection of a mobile device has created a tremendous amount of freedom and access. On the other side, we have companies, organizations, whether you are a for-profit organization or a nonprofit organization, it is so important that you provide the overall environment that enable the inclusive work environment, not just for hiring of people with disability, but also making sure that they progress and also thrive in your work environment. In the past few years, we actually have seen the technology being used in many of the large enterprises, using technology to enable the hiring people with different abilities, starting with people who are blind, who are deaf. And now we have seen the technology being used to help neurodiversity or cognitive disabled people. So these are very encouraging trends as to companies, just as like government setting policies, companies are beginning to understand and really welcome the participation of people with disability in their workforce and in their workplace, and they're leveraging technology to do so. And today, if you think about the innovation of some of the even more advanced technology like artificial intelligence or virtual reality, I see the possibility as even more limitless, as these technologies, what I call the human-first technology. The technology has moved significantly from the old days when it really was meant to optimize, for example, large amount of data processing to improve the data processing productivity and efficiency. But now the technology is in everybody's hand in the form factor like a cell phone. So the technology has become very much consumerized or humanized. And because of that, we now have access to technology on an individual basis, and we can participate the technology through kind of an open dialogue because, again, thanks to this technology, we can have leverage or channels such as social media to give businesses or the inventor of technology immediate feedback from a user perspective. So from that standpoint, we really are entering in a different world and different stage, and in that the human first kind of thinking has to come into the design thinking of any technologist or any company provide services or product. In this case, earlier we talked about we heard from the Minister of Finland about their goal of setting, for example, 1 million accessible dwellings by 2030, and one can imagine these kind of dwelling of the future is going to be a smart home, probably equipped with all kinds of Internet of Things sensors that's interconnected and provide the intelligence to enable people who are, for example, aging or people who are disability, and be able to use things like voice command to navigate their daily experience. And that kind of a technology can also apply to transportation in the form of autonomous vehicle, and then also in terms of workplace technology, such as using smart AI and intelligent AI, and also trusted AI to avoid, for example, unconscious bias in the workplace. And these are all actually technology are being developed and invented in many cases by startup companies. And which actually bring to one of the point I want to emphasize is that as we, begin to implement CRPD as UN, as the global most respected organization that can help businesses and private sector to set the next agenda, in this case, digital agenda, it is actually very important to consider the entire ecosystem from both the enterprise customers, large customers, medium-sized, small business, but also includes startup. I'm very focused on making sure that this whole message and whole desire of an inclusive implementation, environment implementation message actually get passed on to the startup, because the startups actually are the next generation of the technology company that will provide us with different kind of solutions. Another thing that I would say that as we go into the next phase of the CRPD implementation, especially on the year of a COVID-19 and Black Lives Matters, we see the impact of global pandemics and also social justice movements. Together, this, again, really, I think is a call to action time where we have to think about technology inclusion, not just as assistive technology implementation, but as an innovation. And this is a great time to combine social conscience and also social impact kind of thinking along with technology to come up with a new way of thinking about the solution that actually impact not just profit, but also purpose and also value of the individual. And I would just also say that one of the opportunity that we have in front of us actually is with CRPD and also UN leadership, we can begin to think about different business models that encourage businesses not just focusing on profit, but combining the ideal that what we are talking today, which is inclusion, and how to operationalize inclusion through a very methodical, holistic, and also business-oriented end-to-end process. So we view this not as a one-off, sometimes a philanthropical or kind of a charity initiatives, but really as a holistic business imperatives. So with that, I would just end my talk also to say that we have seen that people with disability and the technology innovation for people with disability as a great intersectionality and universality applying to across all gender, race, religion, and all that. So we actually should use this opportunity to dial up the accessibility or digital inclusion, not just for people with disability, because of the impact actually can affect all of us. So thank you very much for the time to speak to the audience today.
Thank you so much, Ms. West. I appreciate that. At this time, allow me to introduce Ms. Bhargavi Davar, Director, Transforming Communities for Inclusion, Asia Pacific. Dr. Davar is a person with psychosocial disability. She has dedicated 2 decades to gender research, peer support practice, advocacy, and disability inclusion. In 1999, Dr. Davar formed Bapu Trust for Research on Mind and Discourse. In 2014, she founded Transforming Communities for Inclusion, Asia Pacific, a regional DPO working with other DPOs and stakeholder groups to promote the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities. At this time, I'd like to welcome Ms. Davar. You have the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates from states parties, delegates representing civil society, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Transforming Communities for Inclusion of Persons with Psychosocial Disabilities, TCI, Asia Pacific, is a regional DPO of persons with psychosocial disabilities and our cross-disability supporters in the Asia and Pacific regions. TCI advocates for Article 19 of the CRPD, that is the right to live independently and be included in communities. Inclusion is the outcome of the realization of all civil, political, social, and economic rights as provided for in the CRPD, and is a human right in itself as exemplified by General Comment 5 of the CRPD monitoring body, treaty body. Transforming Communities for Inclusion, Asia Pacific, deeply appreciates the convergence of many UN agencies in the last couple of years, including, of course, the CRPD treaty bodies, the Human Rights Council, various special procedures mechanisms through the special rapporteurs offices, the ILO, the WHO, to name only a few, to transform the mental health systems worldwide from a medical model to the social model. The Mental Health and Human Rights Resolution, reports of the Disability Rapporteur, the Rapporteur on Torture, Rapporteur on Health, the highest attainable standard of health and well-being, the WHO Quality Rights Initiative to reform the mental health systems, and allied public policies have reflected the worldwide experience of users and survivors of psychiatry, that in fact, traditional mental health systems cause harm and violence through the use of coercion and force. In this regard, I post a highlight on the Special Rapporteur's report in the final report before he left the mandate. This is Dr. Denius Puras, who highlighted the fact that there are many doors to enter the lives of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And entry through the mental health door often leads to serious violations of human rights. This is after 10 years of the CRPD, 10 years and more of the CRPD. The continuing presence of incapacity provisions in law, including constitutional law, along with involuntary commitment to medical care institutions, results in the full exclusion for persons presumed to be mentally ill, as well as persons with psychosocial disabilities. Unfortunately, despite a decade and over of the CRPD and state parties' obligations to dismantle laws that cancel out our civil and political rights, legal incapacity laws and custodial institutions have remained. In fact, in the Asia-Pacific region, they flourish and they are growing in numbers with the introduction of new mental health legislations which have coercion at the core. Unfortunately, again, using the CRPD momentum, we have also been witness to sweeping efforts to scale up mental health services in its traditional sense, especially in the global south, resulting in an upsurge of human rights violations and silencing of our voices. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a worrying trend indeed. During COVID times, for example, institutionalization has increased and violations of right to life and liberty have multiplied. I want to bring to your attention the practice of triple detention inside a mental hospital. In many parts of the Asia-Pacific region, they continue in form and function as mental asylums, often retaining the old structures. So in TCI Asia-Pacific, in the Asia-Pacific region, we are in an ironic situation of having to assert that nothing about us without us is our slogan, the slogan of DPOs of persons with psychosocial disabilities. We are having to exhort a moral obligation that this slogan ought not to be appropriated by medical service providers who continue to distort our speech, stifle us into silence, and run our movements. Herein lies one of the most important civil political rights which will allow us to be included in society at large. And this is the right to form independent and autonomous associations of persons with psychosocial disabilities. This right must be upheld worldwide. In many parts of the world where incapacity laws exist, persons with psychosocial disabilities under the incapacity regime of unsoundness of mind till today cannot form independent and autonomous associations. Persons with psychosocial disabilities are under the even constitutional law do not have the right to vote in many parts of the Asia-Pacific region. UN mechanisms at different levels have guided mental health systems to move from mere harm reduction and amelioration to a complete paradigm shift towards transformation. Such transformation, we expect, will enhance the true potential available within a broader range of development-linked social and human services to offer, for example, personal support, a variety of psychosocial and well-being promoting services, trauma-informed services, human rights compliant and community-centered services to people who may seek such services. Until such transformation happens worldwide towards independent and inclusive community living, towards barrier-free environments, being able to access development solutions on equal basis with others, to choose from a range of social, economic, leisure, nutritional, sporting, cultural, and other services on equal basis with others, the full inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities is hard to envision and implement. A recent learning of TCI is that any service should enhance the potential and the opportunity for the inclusion of persons with disabilities and not to reduce it, as the mental health systems are continuing to do. Inclusion is about access to all the human rights as provided for in the CRPD to the person with a psychosocial disability at the central point of all decision making. Ladies and gentlemen, areas of engagement for TCI in the last year has been around the life-threatening situation faced by persons with psychosocial disabilities during disaster. Living as we are in disaster-prone regions and living as we are confined within different kinds of formal and informal institutions. Persons with psychosocial disabilities are excluded from social protection, housing, work and livelihoods, financial, educational, and other development-linked services and programs. Political participation continues to be a big challenge as the right to vote, stand in elections, and hold public office are denied in many countries, oftentimes constitutionally. Honorable officers here today, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as far as persons with psychosocial disabilities are concerned, we together have a lot to do towards the full inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Thank you so much for this audience.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davar, for your powerful presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Mark Mapemba, Vice President of Inclusion International, Malawi. Mr. Mapemba is a self-advocate with an intellectual disability. In addition to his work with PodCam, he is a board member and self-advocate representative for Inclusion Africa, a council member and officer for Inclusion International, and a city councilor in Blantyre, Malawi. Mr. Mapemba has advocated for disability inclusion at many human rights conferences and summits. Furthermore, he has led CRPD and human rights trainings for self-advocates, traveling to more than 3 continents to conduct such trainings. At this time, Mr. Mapemba, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am Mark Mapemba. I'm from Malawi and I'm a self-advocate. A self-advocate is a person with intellectual disability who speaks up about their rights. I would like to speak today about inclusive environment and what it means for people with intellectual disabilities. People with an intellectual disability are a group of people who are most often left behind and are not included. This is because the communities do not understand the barriers we face and the support, time and accommodation we need to take part and be included. Inclusive environment should be environments that are inclusive for everyone, where everyone can access and take part. This environment could be our family home, our school, our working place, public services like banks and transport station. In all of these places, we should have information, accommodation, support and time that we need to access them and take part in our community. Universal design is about accessibility for everyone, including people with disabilities. Now, people with intellectual disability cannot access or have challenges to access or have challenges to access many facilities. There are barriers like complicated information or lack of access to technology or no support. When a facility like public transport or bank is designed well, we can all access it on our own. Universal design can make the accessibility of facility better, but we must also make sure someone who may have individual needs is not left behind. Some examples from my own personal experience of accessibility and being included well is when I become a member of local council in my community. The information and documents were not sent in good time. I asked to receive the information and document with enough time before the meeting. This is also I can go through them, understand them well and ask any questions. Another example is form of my experience as an officer of Inclusion International. One of the accommodations accommodation is that I receive easy to understand information, and before each meeting I have a pre-meeting with my support person and staff so that we can review and understand the papers and be prepared. It is important that government and organizations from civil societies work together. Government should develop inclusive plan with people with intellectual disabilities. People with disabilities understand the barriers and can identify them in different sectors. People with disabilities should also be part of making their plan. Currently, Inclusion International and Down Syndrome are working together to produce international guidelines on inclusive participation. These are the listening, including the respect guidelines. These guidelines are made with people with intellectual disabilities. They are for government and other organizations and are about on how they can make sure people with intellectual disability are included and can take part in their work, activities, and decision making. We hope these guidelines will make sure that few people are left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mapemba, for your presentation. At this time, I will now pass the chairmanship back to my co-chair, His Excellency Salovaara.
Thank you so much, Juan Angel, and I would also like to thank all the panelists for their excellent presentations. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the second phase of this roundtable, and that is the interactive discussion between the panelists and delegations. As we informed you at the outset of the panel discussion, in the following segment of unfortunately now less than 1 hour, there is an opportunity for delegations and other observers to take the floor. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now I open the floor. As you know, to make requests to take the floor, delegations are invited to do that through a dedicated speaker request form accessible in the chat board of the WebEx event platform for the next 3 minutes. After that, we will close the list. Please select send me a copy of my responses in the bottom of the form. Accredited NGOs and other observers have prior to this conference already submitted their request in writing to the Secretariat. Please only take the floor when invited to speak. When the name of your delegation or organization is called, your microphone will be unmuted. Please either pose specific questions to any panelist or make your brief comments relevant to the current discussion. The delivery of written statements is strongly discouraged. All interventions may speak no more than 3 minutes with no exception. Speakers shall start wrapping up at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and the microphones will be automatically muted when the allotted speaking time has elapsed. I count on everyone for your cooperation to keep the time limit. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would first like to recognize Ms. Tamila Barkalaya as the first one on my list. I kindly invite Ms. Tamila Barkalaya, Deputy Minister of International Displaced Persons from the Occupied Territories, Labour, Health and Social Affairs of Georgia. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Georgia. It is an honor to address you this morning and underline Georgia's commitment towards implementation of CRPD. Georgia has ratified CRPD in 2014, and since then, significant measures have been taken to fight inequality, stigma, discrimination, and promote inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities into society. Social rehabilitation programs promoting independent living have been established, and variety and access to social programs and services are increasing every year. Inclusive education has been introduced into Georgian schools, and monthly cash transfers equal to old age pensions are disbursed on a monthly basis. But there is so much more that remains to be achieved in the country. July 14, 2020 marks a significant date in history of Georgia because Parliament adopted the law on the rights of persons with disabilities. The law establishes fundamental principles to guide government implementation of CRPD and clarifies the roles and responsibilities of different government institutions. Following the adoption of the law, the government is now working on the strategy and action plan, and we are keeping nothing about us without us principle in mind. And community groups, NGOs, international partners are involved in the process. Our main focus in the new strategy is to ensure improved access to healthcare and social support systems, increased participation of local governments in establishing inclusive local services, and inclusive education, including vocational education and training, and access to public employment services. The major change that is planned in the country is introduction of social model of disability, because unfortunately, Georgia still is using medical model at the present. We believe that this change will further contribute to mindset change that will lead to full inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities in society and in economy. COVID-19 pandemic highlighted many challenges and vulnerabilities that persons with disabilities face. Government stimulus package includes special remittances for people with disabilities, and many of the services, social services, have been digitalized and moved to online platforms. And we will continue to keep the needs and consider the needs of people with disabilities in our post-pandemic recovery plan. The government of Georgia will continue to work closely with people with disabilities, with community stakeholders, civil society, and international partners to ensure full and equal enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms by persons with disabilities in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister, and thank you for keeping time. And next, I would like to give the floor to Hlengiwe Mkhize, the Deputy Minister of South Africa. The floor is yours, please.
Your Excellency, all panelists and state parties in attendance to this roundtable. Your Excellency, South Africa aligns itself with the theme and objectives of the 13th Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which coincide with the commemoration of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. In accordance with Article 40 of the CRPD, South Africa appreciates the opportunity to participate in the 13th Conference of State Parties, which coincide with the commemoration of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. To mark this historic day, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, has addressed the nation by outlining the country's commitment towards accelerating the implementation of the CRPD and all human rights instruments which promotes and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. The National Development Plan, which is our Vision 2030, is currently under review so as to strengthen the mainstreaming of women, youth, and persons with disabilities. The 2019-2024 Plan of Action for the first time was strategically disability mainstreamed across all 7 government priorities. Your Excellency, in response to the sub-thematic area promoting inclusive environments for the full implementation of the CRPD, South Africa has produced the Universal Design and Access Framework that will be lobbied across all sectors in order to promote compliance and ensure inclusive environment. The framework is intended to be used as a practical guide, providing information and advice on universal design and access for government, the private sector, civil society, and including rights holders themselves. Your Excellency, prioritizes the inclusive sustainable development goals in line with the Global Development Agenda and Africa Agenda 2063, so that indeed on the continent we leave no one behind. South Africa is a signatory to the African Union Protocol on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The process of ratifying the African Union Protocol is currently underway. South Africa's chairpersonship of the African Union created an opportunity for the country to advocate for the promotion of human rights and prevention of gender-based violence against women and girls, including persons with disabilities. On the implementation of the CRDP policy, review and alignment, as well as implementation, coherence needs to be strengthened. The disability rights legislation meant to domesticate the CRPD is expected to be finalized by 2024. The National Integrated Plan of Action to be implemented is being developed, and therefore the UN CRPD committees observations and comprehensive report will be submitted within stipulated period of year 22. South Africa commits to collaborating with other state parties to ensure the outcomes of the COSP13 on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities are realized. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. And now I would like to give the floor to the Russian delegation. Mr. Maxim Viryukov, the floor is yours.
Благодарю вас, господин.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last 8 years, since the Russian Federation ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the country's legislation has changed a great deal, affecting not only persons with disabilities, who make up around 9% of the population, but also other people with restricted mobility. The current legislation aims to implement the provisions of the Convention and has enshrined the state's obligation to ensure the functioning of the social protection system for persons with disabilities, aimed at ensuring the accessibility of facilities and services for persons with disabilities and improving their quality of life. For 10 years, the state program Accessible Environment has been implemented, aimed at ensuring the successful integration of persons with disabilities into society. As part of the state program, harmonized approaches and methodological documents have been developed to organize the rehabilitation process across the country according to the same rules. The procedure for getting state services for persons with disabilities has been simplified, additional jobs have been created for persons with disabilities, and this is helping to improve the transport infrastructure, ensure that rehabilitation resources are available, and increasing the number of rehabilitation centres. Over the implementation of the state programme, there's been a substantial increase in the accessibility of facilities. Conditions have been created for children with disabilities to study in schools, kindergartens, and vocational education organisations have been created that are adapted to training persons with disabilities. Taking into account the effectiveness of the state programme, its implementation has been extended to 2025. In the conditions of the novel coronavirus infection, Russia is taking steps to ensure the uninterrupted and timely provision of services to social protection and support services to citizens with disabilities. The government of the Russian Federation has adopted a number of immediate measures, including targeting citizens with restricted mobility to ensure social support for those persons without them having to visit offices in person. In particular, from the 1st of April 2020 to the 1st of March 2021, a temporary simplified procedure has been established for renewing previously established disability without a person having to go through a medical and social assessment in person. Particular attention during the pandemic is being paid to preserving the health of persons with disabilities living in social care facilities. A weekly monitoring exercise for the health of persons living in those facilities has been launched. As a result, a large number of infections and a high mortality rate has been avoided in those facilities. The interaction between care homes and non-profits has been established as well to ensure that during the quarantine period, some people have been able to be moved out of state institutions into non-profit run facilities. A particular mechanism has been created for non-profit organisations, including special payments, one-off payments to their workers who've been seconded from the care homes to take care of elderly persons and persons with disabilities from the 1st of April to the 30th of June. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. And next, I would like to invite the first NGO who has asked the floor. I recognize Ms. Yeni Rosa from the Indonesian Mental Health Association. Ms. Rosa, you have the floor.
Okay. Distinguished chairperson and esteemed third parties, on this very day, right on the celebration of International Day of Persons with Disabilities, I would like to talk to you on behalf of the forgotten people, the voice of hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities, especially psychosocial disabilities, who are left to live in the confinement of psychiatric hospitals and social care institutions around the world, deprived of their liberty, forgotten. In Japan, nearly 300 persons with disabilities live in more than 1,000 psychiatric hospitals. In Indonesia, thousands of people with psychosocial disabilities are trapped, living in social institutions where conditions are so bad that Human Rights Watch has titled its report on social institutions in Indonesia, Living in Hell. In those Indonesian institutions, people with psychosocial disabilities are put in prison-like facilities, put in solitary confinement, even restrained and even chained. Stigma, homelessness, no source of income or support system, resource and policy deficits for possible discharge and absence of legal capacities. These are several factors that made persons with psychosocial disabilities trapped in these institutions. People with psychosocial disabilities end up trapped because they have been abandoned and have no other place to go, and the governments do not provide any support to enable them to live independently in society. I have no words to describe my frustrations on how the world still let this happen after a long, long time. How could the government continue to look away and come here saying that you are doing enough when the actions needed are still nowhere in sight? If you hear us and say that you understand the urgency, how could many of you still kept on failing to act? It is time for the UN system and the state parties to think of a way to accelerate the process of deinstitutionalization and to oblige countries that have ratified the CRPD to take time-bound steps to release our persons with disabilities who have been deprived of their liberty in mental institutions as stated clearly in the CRPD Article 14 and 19. In the absence of legal capacity, persons with psychosocial disabilities are unable to refuse an actions committed against them. The lack of legal capacity also causes many persons with psychosocial disabilities to lose their socio-economic and political rights. We deem as not capable to work. In Indonesia, one of the requirements to become a government employee or to work in private companies to submit a certificate of physical and mental fitness. And to get a certificate of mental fitness, each applicant must undergo a series of psychological tests to track whether the person has mental health problems or not. This is clearly a violation of Article 27 of the CRPDs. Therefore, I would like to ask all the representatives of the countries who attended this event that after you return, please do seriously examine the condition in your country regarding the situations of persons with disabilities. If there are still discriminations and inequality in your country, then you, as the official representatives of your government, have the duty to initiate these improvements. Right here, right now, it's time to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rosa. Next, I would like to give the floor to the delegate from Ireland. So Brian Flynn, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all our panelists. Universal design is key to creating inclusive environments. Universal design ensures that there is an inclusive and integrated approach to the design and delivery of services, products, environments, and technologies that enables all citizens to participate fully in their commitments and wider society. I want to just briefly refer to some of the areas where Ireland leads and participates on this. Ireland is unique in having a centre of excellence in universal design as part of the National Disability Authority. The centre has led on the development and delivery of the European standard EN Design for All standard. This standard has a twofold mission: designing better goods and services that are accessible and usable, and ensuring that a diverse range of users, including persons with disabilities, are involved in the design process from inception to final delivery. The standard aims to help organisations align with a consistent approach to address accessibility for persons with disabilities. Ireland has a national policy that 30% of new dwellings will be built to universal design principles. This is an important step and will help ensure persons with disabilities are able to have a dwelling where they can live independently. Ireland believes that by applying a universal design approach, we can develop environments which include people with disabilities from the beginning and which works better for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thanks for being brief. And next, I would like to give the floor to the delegate of Iran, Mr. Mohammed Zareyan. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. Chair, accessibility for people with disabilities should be included as part of inclusive and sustainable development in strengthening development policies and their role in sustainable development in society. The Welfare Organization in the Islamic Republic of Iran provides loans to people with disabilities to start their own businesses and also supports businesses of persons with disabilities by launching or supporting exhibitions. According to the article of the Comprehensive Law for the Protection of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, all ministries, institutions, organizations, and companies of the government and public institutions are obliged to design, produce, and construct public buildings, places, and passages and service facilities in a way that is accessible to them. Disabled be provided like others. With the advent of COVID-19 pandemic, welfare organization continues to support and contract doctors to visit people with disabilities through cyberspace. All educational services are provided online or in a limited way with a small population. And in the case of home visit services, all health protocols are more restricted and strict. And now daycare centers, 24-hour centers, and home care centers follow the instructions. They are active and no center is currently closed. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. And next I would like to invite Mr. Mukasa Apollo from the Uganda National Action on Physical Disability. Mr. Apollo, you have the floor. I cannot hear from Mr. Apollo, so let's keep that place warm and move up on our speakers list. And next, I would like to give the floor to the delegate from Turkey, Deniz Gumus. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm from Turkey. I'm working for the General Directorate of Services for Persons with Disabilities and Elderly. First of all, I would like to thank the distinguished panelists for their valuable sharings. As we all know, accessibility is an essential key for the realization of inclusive development that leaves no one behind. Turkey gives very much importance and has considerable efforts in encouraging inclusive environments through accessibility. To this end, Turkey has put in place robust legal arrangements and practices and has established a monitoring and supervision mechanism. This mechanism consists of representatives of various stakeholders, including disability organizations. As the authority to monitor and audit in the field of accessibility, they are entitled to impose fines for inaccessible practices or certify those who meet the accessibility criteria. Through these audits, 1,031 accessibility certificates have been issued by the end of September 2020. In order to encourage accessibility, in addition to various trainings for responsible parties, financial and technical support are provided to the local authorities and public institutions since 2012. To monitor public expenditures related to accessibility, a separate budget code has been created and started to be used in 2018. With the accessibility assessment model created last year, self-assessment to determine accessibility level of existing buildings has become possible. As a reference for professionals, an accessibility guide and an animation are published this year. With the scope of access to information, which has become very critical in the process of pandemic, a regulation to improve the accessibility of broadcast services for persons with disabilities was published in 2019. Besides, a call center which will provide 24/7 service to meet the communication needs of deaf and hard of hearing people in public sphere is on the way of establishment. Upon all these efforts, 2020 was announced as the Accessibility Year by the President with Accessible Turkey, Barrier-Free Life motto. In this scope, Accessibility Awards will be given in order to raise awareness and encourage good practices in 9 categories like design and products, digital applications, media, public institutions, academic works. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And next I would like to give the floor to the delegate of Morocco. So Majda Mouchou, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy International Day of Persons with Disabilities, a time to reflect with concrete actions on how to build back better towards a disability inclusive and accessible world after COVID-19. So this interactive panel, is timely indeed. Mr. Chair, the Constitution of Morocco explicitly bans all forms of discrimination based on disability in its preambular part, as well as in Article 34. The Constitution actually gives also priority to the international conventions duly ratified by the Kingdom of Morocco over domestic law. This in itself reflects the commitment of Morocco national legislation with the provisions of international conventions, including CRPD. Mr. Chair, I would like briefly to stress the following points. First, it is important that stakeholders worldwide tackle the absence or deficiency of provisions related to intellectual and psychological disabilities. This has a negative impact on the implementation of many articles of CRPD. Second, we would like to underline the crucial need to further promote and protect the rights of women and girls with disability worldwide, as well as the need for further measures of protection from gender-based violence and multiple forms of discrimination faced by girls and women with disabilities. We would like to use this opportunity to underline that when providing for the vulnerability of certain categories, policies should not only be gender sensitive. For example, policies should not only be gender sensitive, like elderly sensitive or etc. But also they should be like gender responsive, elderly responsive, etc. So full inclusiveness starts with our own willingness to accept the use of terms of responsiveness as opposed to merely sensitivity. Third, and I think this is my last point, awareness raising and combating stereotypes against persons with disabilities in the media and in public life, as well as sharing information on the rights of persons with disabilities, including through alternative communications such as braille and sign languages, or through engaging local community and religious leaders are key. So, Mr. Chair, would like to just stress in the end, as we're commemorating this important day, we would like to commend the quality of work carried out by civil society, including NGOs in the field of disability and advocacy actions. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to invite Dr. Bernard Mogesa, Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, to take the floor. Mr. Mogesa, please. It seems that we may have a connection problem with Dr. Mogesa, but we will keep the seat warm. And now I would like to give the floor to the delegate from the European Union. So, Immaculada Plasencia Porrero, the floor is yours, please.
Mr. President, at EU level, we have legislation and standards in the areas of the built environment, transport, and ICT. Recent developments, such as the European Accessibility Act and the standards on the accessibility of the built environment, EN 17210, provides for wide guidance and support material that requires and facilitates implementation of accessibility, complementing programs and legislation which the member states have put in place. However, we see that education environments, workplaces, and political processes do not yet reflect sufficiently the outcomes of those developments. In addition, at EU level, there is financial support available to remove existing access barriers and prevent new ones when new developments and infrastructure investments are undertaken. In the EU, there is also recognition and promotion of accessibility and inclusive environments, for example, through the annual Access City Award that is granted to cities that undertake significant advances on accessibility. Accessibility and inclusive services are essential for persons with disabilities to be able to live in the community and participate in society and economy on equal basis with others. EU funds support such investments of the member states, as well as the developments of their support services. At the same time, persons with disabilities and entrepreneurs also need sound knowledge and the appropriate skills to reap the benefits of accessibility and take advantage of related opportunities to create new jobs and business opportunities. Mr. President, examples have been provided of similar initiatives during this session showing the provision of inclusive services, accessible policy, assistive technologies to private and public sector initiatives. Can the panel share their views on how these initiatives can best work together so that our societies can benefit from coherent and disability-inclusive environments? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being brief. And next, I would like to give the floor to the delegate of Costa Rica. So, Mariana Camacho Cordero, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the panelists and the delegates. Can you see me? I don't know if you can see me, I'm sorry.
I hear you, and that's the essential thing.
Okay, thank you. I would like to do it in Spanish because it's faster for me. Some words are going to use in Spanish. I would like to appreciate this space. In Costa Rica, we have included, in Costa Rica, nosotros.
In Costa Rica, we have been promoting maximum accessibility through participation of civil society and business community for several years now with a network of accessibility in Costa Rica, and we are promoting the development of inclusive activities and accessibility in our country's beaches, and this is one of the fundamental pillars of our economies, tourism. And we're also working with Inteco to set up technical rules and standards and under the law on persons with disabilities. However, I did want to highlight the importance of linking the right to accessibility and the inclusion of people with disabilities to implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, especially when it comes to reducing inequality gaps between countries and when it comes to building multi-sectoral partnerships with the business society and civil society. And the reason for this is that access to technologies at this time is key. Turning now to COVID-19, this is an opportunity for us to boost technologies and the use of internet as to come up with new development opportunities for people with disabilities. However, there are significant gaps when it comes to accessing the internet and technologies, but also when it comes to using those technologies. And so we have to continue to work in this area so that we can have more participation of people with disabilities if indeed we are to become a truly inclusive society and ensure that there's universal access. Many thanks to you, and I'd like to congratulate everyone for this commemoration of the International Day of People with Disabilities, Persons with Disabilities.
And I have been informed that since Mr. Apollo from the Uganda National Action on Physical Disability is unable to connect, that Yeni Rosa from the Indonesian Mental Health Association is prepared to make a short statement on his behalf. So, Ms. Rosa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will talk on behalf of Mukasa Apollo, Executive Director, Uganda National Action Plan, Uganda National Action on Physical Disability, or UNAPD. Greetings from Uganda National Action on Physical Disability. UNAPD is an umbrella organization with 38 district associations with over 7,400 individual members. Our work is dedicated to removing barriers that prevent persons with disabilities from enjoying their rights. It is a great honor to be addressing the Conference of State Parties on the topic of inclusive environment for CRPD implementation, especially on the occasion of the International Day for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The journey toward inclusive built environment in Uganda has been a long one. In 2007, the Ministry of Work, Transport and Communication found that 95% of buildings in Kampala and surrounding districts were not accessible. Uganda's ratification of CRPD in 2008 ignited UNAPD to act for the implementation of the Article 9, starting with a review of relevant laws. With the support of Dance Handicap Forum and in consultation with many stakeholders, when UNAPD then developed accessibility standards that were adopted by Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development in 2010 in May. The standard not only addressed the access barriers faced by Ugandans with physical and sensory disabilities, but also those with intellectual and psychosocial disability and other excluded impairment groups. They provide practical guidance to construct accessibility facilities such as toilets, while also addressing the accessibility of services, information, and communication. To monitor and enforce compliance, accessibility audit committees comprised of DPOs and experts were established at national and district level. In 2013, UNAPD successfully lobbied the Parliament to incorporate the accessibility standards into a new Building Control Act 2013. This means that the construction industry is legally bound to ensure accessibility in all new construction. Over the past decade, the standards have had far-reaching impact. Shortly after their launch, the Ministry of Education mandated that the standards be applied to all school construction projects funded at the national and district level education, and very proud of practical benefits by learners with disabilities currently accessing education after auditing of schools. After UNAPD and her membership association at grassroots level engaged Nabala sub-county in Mukono district to pass a local ordinance or bylaw on accessibility mandating compliance with the standard. Okay, in March 2018, the accessibility standards were recognized by the Zero Project as among the most innovative policies in the world on accessibilities. I welcome the opportunity to share the UNAPD experience with any DPO striving for a more inclusive, equitable built environment in the COVID context and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I really apologize for being such a poor timekeeper today, and which means that we really need to wrap up and move to our panelists to give them the opportunity to react to the interventions that have been made, and also to make some short closing remarks at the same time. So I will ask our excellent panelists to be very brief, sort of max 2 minutes for your sort of reactions and closing statements. And I would like to start with Mr. Paweł Wdówik from Poland. The floor is yours, please. We may not have Mr. Wdówik with us. Oh, do we have you? Yes?
Yes,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I am also having some technical issues, but fortunately I am back. So thank you very much for having a chance to speak again. I would like to thank you all for very important comments and very important voices in this discussion. What I would like to stress is the fact that we definitely must be aware how wide is the range of disabilities, and that talking about disability does not mean one particular solution or attitude. The only attitude which is common to all persons with disabilities is tolerance and acceptance, and giving the full rights for participation in societies. And I'm proud that we are now building the world which is recognizing the rights of persons with disabilities and giving all of us the chance to live full lives. And I wish that it really can happen in all countries around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wdówik. And next I would like to hear from Mr. Santiago Velasquez, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Your Excellencies and co-panelists, for an amazing discussion and hearing some very critical points of view. If I may address a couple of points from the audience, in particular, I'll start with Ireland, Ryan, and Europe, Ms. Immaculada. It's very important what you guys are doing with the areas of inclusivity and policy. As a person that works in the STEM fields as my primary sort of objective and what I do, I would like for everybody, not, to keep in mind that to make our society inclusive and to make spaces inclusive and to pursue universal design, asking questions isn't enough. Sometimes involve people from the get-go, and especially if you can encourage people to pursue degrees in the areas that we're seeking to improve in terms of inclusivity and development. Engineers have experience as engineers plus their own lived experience. Lawyers have experience as lawyers plus their lived experience. And we can all do any degree we choose to. Regarding the comments made by the representative from the NGO apologies for that, the NGO from Indonesia, you make a very critical point, which is we don't pay enough attention sometimes, and it varies depending on the country that we come from and how well we're approaching some disability sections. And it's all relative, right? If we're doing well, we tend to identify the problems that we need to address. If we're not doing as well, we tend to sort of say, I think we are doing well, which is a contradiction in term, but sadly, we need to be aware of what we're not aware. Say, if you don't know, just say it. Last, if I may make this point in Spanish, the representative from Costa Rica.
The comments that you made based on tourism and accessible tourism are very important. And the reason for this is that as persons with disabilities, we do not have the same opportunities to move around the world as those who can do everything. Traveling from one corner of the house to another is very difficult for many people and requires a great deal of preparation. And if countries around the world can include in their planning and development plans goals to ensure that people living in their countries can actually travel, but that people who also want to travel to their countries can move around in their countries and do not feel trapped, that is a policy that has a lot of merit and deserves replication across the world.
For the great discussions, look forward to seeing what happens in 1 year's time at COSP13.
Well, thank you, and thanks for being with us. And next, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Frances West, please.
Well, thank you very much. For me, this timing of a 2020 sitting in December, in this post-COVID world, all the institutions around the world, public, private, nonprofit, will be rethinking their digital technology strategy and accelerate technology transformation. And again, I think this is a perfect time for UN combining all these leadership initiatives like the Sustainable Development Goal and bring it together and to really lead the way in terms of designing a world with a technology as underpinning. And because of that, the use case designed for people with disability is most relevant and most universal of any other demographic types. We heard a lot about, designing for millennial and for different market, but aging and ability are area that cross all demographics. So I think the opportunity is upon us to seize. And I think UN can also encourage more research, not in the policy side. I think we have done enough, or we have done a lot of work in the policy research on why, for example, people with disability needs to be participating in society holistically, especially in the workplace. But I think encouragement of academia to study the innovation, how innovation, especially in the technology area, and also building the technology of the future that can impact the work of the future, the society of the future, could be a kind of an onward focus. Last but not the least, I think many of the speakers already talked about the designing in. I think, again, going back to my original kind of a point about, innovation ecosystems start with startups. If we can encourage people with disabilities to participate as a design partner or as partners in general in the technology innovation ecosystem, I think we will do a lot in terms of building it in and then make it a kind of a organic, inclusion versus a add-on inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And next, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Bhargavi Davar, please. Do we have Ms. Davar? If not, perhaps I could sort of move on and ask Mr. Mark Mapemba to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Let me close by saying that as we are talking about barriers of maybe having good environment for accessing information, these are things that we have been talking years and years. And now, I was thinking about why are we having this problem that we are talking about some issues years and years. It's high time we step forward each country from our excesses, take actions. Let us, some problems that we always talk barriers about people with disabilities should be addressed. And maybe one of the COPs that we meet, we celebrate that we have achieved this and this and this. So in that way, we can say we are progressing, but following years back, since I was a little bit young, when I was following this, some issues and barriers are there. And I was thinking that all this is a matter of minds and change. We have government, we need to change their mindset. We have a community, we need to change their mindset. If their mindsets are changing and they're thinking as we think as people with a disability, I think we can good environment and enjoy together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mapemba. And I'm still checking whether we have Ms. Bhargavi Davar with us.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, please.
Sorry to have blinked off. I had a network issue here. So I'd like to just be very brief and say that the vision of inclusion given by the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it's a very vast vision. I believe so that with the CRPD and the SDGs and the fact that nearly all governments of the world are committed to both, I think there's a very, very big opportunity there to slowly take all persons with disabilities towards an inclusive and enabling environment so that they can attain full potential. We do want to see that as programs unfold, the human services are better prepared for providing, various necessary community-based opportunities for people to receive support as well as contribute positively to society, whether it be personal assistants, whether it be sign language interpreters. We are very, very short of sign language interpreters worldwide. We are just not there with respect to various kinds of human psychosocial services for all persons with disabilities. Also, of course, independent living should be an opportunity for all persons with disabilities, and there should be no exclusion of some groups of persons with disabilities. So respect for diversity, in terms of including everyone into all programs, all development programs, I think this will be so important for the future. So thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much, and thank you all the panelists and all the participants. And I think that we really had a rich discussion today. And many speakers stressed that inclusive environments are key for the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities and to promote independent living. Although barriers remain in laws and various environments, we heard of many good practices on how to take this agenda forward. Making environments inclusive is a collective effort involving many stakeholders. Thank you for a productive discussion sharing concrete solutions to promote inclusive environments for the full implementation of the CRPD. And now I would like to ask if Mr. Juan Angel De Gouvei, my peer co-chair of the round table, may wish to say a few final words at this point.
Yes, hello. It is my great pleasure to speak at this time as a member representing Latin America through RIADIS. I am pleased with the work that we have done today, together with my colleagues, my co-chairs, and all the participants. I would also like to acknowledge the valuable contribution of each of you in this discussion. Through these contributions, we were able to learn of the different experiences that have been presented in this roundtable number 3, all clarifying the important topic, the promotion of inclusive environments for the full implementation of the CRPD. In conclusion, I allow myself to insist on the important role that civil society organizations must assume. The organizations of people with disabilities that know each reality of their members, that live each particular situation, can determine the needs of that population with such disabilities. This is the best way to generate proposals, to be able to exercise active participation in the planning of strategies. We must continue fighting to conquer spaces and take advantage of those that already exist for debate and exchange between governments, individuals, private companies, and organizations. It is our task to insist on every place and every place that we can. In this way, we will achieve full inclusion when the convention is effectively applied and when it is used as a reference framework for the development of any program aimed at persons with disabilities so that no one is left behind. For example, we have now seen during this pandemic situation how gaps have increased and how some barriers and violations have occurred exponentially. However, we must persist in looking at the opportunities and at generating all of the necessary incidents so that the response plans and adaptations of the new normalities are framed in the convention and are accessible and inclusive plans and programs in all public policies. I wish to thank you so much for this valuable opportunity.
And thank you so much. And it has been a pleasure to co-chair with you. And I would like to thank all our distinguished panelists at this roundtable, all delegates and participants from the civil society community and the United Nations system for your valuable contributions to our roundtable on promoting inclusive environments for the full implementation of the CRPD. With this, I now conclude the roundtable and thank you all.